Apple has been fined $3 billion for breaking competition laws in Europe. The European Commission has found the tech firm prevented rival music streaming services from telling iPhone and iPad users that there are cheaper ways to subscribe to them by going outside Apple's App Store, for example, on their websites.
This is illegal, and it has impacted millions of European consumers. They were not able to make a free choice as to where, how and at what prices to buy music streaming subscriptions.
The case was brought after a 2019 complaint from Swedish-based streamer Spotify, which accused Apple of taxing competitors to advantage their own services.
If you were to upgrade to premium in our app through the App Store, we'd have to give Apple a whopping 30% of your subscription fee. Apple knows we can't afford to pay that tax and keep our prices low for our fans. So we decided not to use their payment system. But Apple won't let you pay by any other way.
This is the EU's first antitrust penalty against Apple. It says the US giant was hit with a large fine to deter it and other big tech firms from violating its antitrust laws in the future. Spotify is welcoming the move.
This decision sends a powerful message. No company, not even a monopoly like Apple, can wield power abusively to control how other companies interact with their customers.
Apple and Spotify have been locked in a years-long bitter battle in the music streaming market. Apple is planning to appeal to Europe's second highest court, a process that could take several years. The California-based firm maintains its rival is the biggest beneficiary of the European Commission's penalty.
The decision was reached despite the Commission's failure to uncover any credible evidence of consumer harm and ignores the realities of a market that is thriving, competitive and growing fast. Today, Spotify has a 56% share of Europe's music streaming market, more than double their closest competitors, and pays Apple nothing for the services that have helped make them one of the most recognisable brands in the world.
The EU has led global efforts to crack down on big tech companies, including the likes of Google, Meta, Microsoft, TikTok and Amazon. It's introducing a sweeping set of regulations as part of its Digital Markets Act, which will act as a gatekeeper. And as for Australia, the competition watchdog is conducting a 5-year inquiry into the supply of digital platform services, looking at their impacts on competition and consumers. Well, let's get more on this. We're joined by tech expert Dr. Zena Assad from the ANU School of Engineering at the Australian National University, that is. Now, Dr. Assad, can you explain to us how big a deal this is in the tech space and for Apple?
I think it's a pretty big deal. As far as the fine itself, I mean, I don't know how much of a dent that's actually going to put in Apple's business in the grand scheme of things. But from a consumer perspective and a reputation perspective, I would say it's a pretty big deal because it's really opened up a lot of consumers' eyes into the kinds of business practices that Apple has been participating in over the years.
And can you briefly explain to us what are antitrust laws?
Antitrust laws are basically competition laws, and they prohibit people from creating unfair markets or concentrated markets. So basically, it's where you kind of freeze out smaller competitors and not allow them to fairly compete within the market.
And tell us more about how Apple was found to have breached this and how it favoured its own streaming service.
So with this one in particular, it was actually in reference to Spotify, the music streaming service, and basically Apple was not being transparent and disclosing that there were different payment options for Spotify. So if you were a consumer within Apple, you were paying for Spotify through an Apple payment service. And what you may not have been aware of is that you're probably paying a slightly larger amount because Apple was taking a percentage of that payment.
So in terms of impact on consumers, they're getting charged more than they otherwise could be. Are there other effects there?
There are huge effects. The biggest one is that it creates a concentrated market. And the issue with the concentrated market is that there is not enough competition within the market for smaller competitors. And it also means a lot less innovation within that market. You know, it's easier to produce something that's not as innovative and not as creative when you're the biggest player in the market. And you know that regardless of what you produce, you're going to end up being probably the number one for most consumers.
Now, antitrust laws are enforced at domestic levels, so how does this affect Australian consumers?
We don't know yet. So because antitrust laws are are enforced at domestic levels. We don't know if the changes that Apple will be forced to make will only pertain to the European Union or if they will also trickle down to a more global perspective and all the way down to Australia. So I think it's kind of a time will tell situation.
Now, the EU has largely led the way here. They've got the Digital Markets Act taking effect this week. So what do we know about what EU consumers will be getting that we might not be?
They will be getting a fairer market and they will be getting more transparency. But again, we may see this in Australia as well. Apple may make changes at a global level or they may just make them at a European level. We're still not sure. I personally would be very interested to see kind of how this affects Australia on a more specific level.
And to Australia, I mean, there have been wins here as well against big tech, haven't there?
We've had a few. So we do have the investigation that's been happening over the last 5 years, but I would say that Australia hasn't really filed any lawsuits like the US or like the European Union has. So it's a little bit different for us here.
And as to this case, how has Apple reacted? What will the company do next?
So they have actually appealed the decision and they're claiming that there wasn't enough evidence to show that there was harm to consumers. So they are appealing the decision, but what they will do next, I'm not sure. I do know that they have already, so there's already been some talk about a fine with their pay and go system. So their pay and go system is basically where you have two Apple phones and you can do a contactless payment between them, but you can't between other devices and other competitors. So they've already said that they're going to open that one up to other competitors to make it more fair. So we're already seeing some changes in their incentives, but I think time will tell what the other changes might be.